The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt in the dusty streets of Cedar Ridge, Wyoming, and Silas Hawthorne felt his heart stop with them. Through the settling dust cloud, he saw her, Eliza Blackwood, his mail-order bride from Philadelphia, but nothing about this moment matched what he'd imagined. She stumbled from the coach, her green traveling dress torn at the hem, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins, and tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face. The other passengers hurried away, leaving her standing alone with a single carpet bag, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Silas had seen plenty of broken things on the frontier, horses with shattered legs, men with shattered dreams, but watching this woman crumble in the middle of Main Street hit him somewhere deep in his chest. He'd expected a practical arrangement, maybe some awkward small talk, certainly not this raw display of grief that made every person on the street stop and stare. Before we jump back in, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in Texas, afternoon in Canada, or evening in Germany. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are, and if this story touches you, make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow I have saved something extra special for you. Now, let's dive into the story. She looked up then, those green eyes finding his across the 20 feet of dirt road between them, and he saw it. Pure terror mixed with shame. Her lips formed words he couldn't hear over the wind, but he read them clear enough. "I'm sorry." Before he could move, she was talking fast, the words tumbling out between hiccuping breaths. "Mr. Hawthorne, I know this isn't. I shouldn't have come. I've made such a terrible mistake." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed a gloved hand to her mouth, as if trying to push the sobs back down. The townspeople were watching now, Mrs. Garrett from the general store, old Pete from the saloon. Even Sheriff McKenna had stepped out to see the commotion. Silas knew how this looked. Another city woman who couldn't handle the frontier. Another mail-order arrangement gone wrong before it even started. But something in the way she held herself, trying so hard to stand straight, even as she fell apart, told him there was more to this story. He crossed the distance between them in 5 long strides, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust that caught in the afternoon sun. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the kind that came from more than just a long journey. There were shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, and her hands trembled even as she tried to smooth down her skirts. "Miss Blackwood," he said, keeping his voice low enough that the gossips couldn't hear, "whatever's troubling you, we don't need to sort it out here in the street." She shook her head violently, sending more pins flying from her hair. "You don't understand. I lied to you. Not in my letters, but by not telling you." Another sob escaped, and she looked ready to bolt, maybe run straight back to that stagecoach and beg for a return ticket. That's when Silas did something that shocked everyone watching, including himself. He took off his worn leather coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, creating a small shelter from all those prying eyes. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said, the words coming out rougher than he intended, colored by his own memories of arriving in Cedar Ridge 5 years ago, with nothing but shame and secrets. "Whatever you're running from, whatever sent you here in tears, it doesn't change the fact that you're standing here now, and that took courage." She looked up at him then, really looked, and he saw surprise flicker across her features. Maybe she'd expected anger or disappointment. Maybe she'd prepared herself for rejection, but she hadn't expected understanding. "But when you know the truth," she started, and he cut her off with a gentle shake of his head. The truth can wait until you've had some water and rest. My ranch is 3 miles north. We can talk there, away from all these eager ears." He gestured to his wagon, a sturdy thing built to last through Wyoming winters, and she took a shaky step toward it. That's when her legs gave out, the exhaustion and emotion finally winning, and Silas caught her before she hit the ground, his arms steady and sure around her trembling frame. The crowd gasped. Nothing this exciting had happened in Cedar Ridge since the last cattle rustling, but Silas ignored them all. He lifted Eliza easily, surprised by how light she felt, how fragile, like a bird that had flown too far from home. As he settled her in the wagon bed, making a cushion from horse blankets, she whispered something that made his chest tighten. "The headmaster's son. He said things about me, lies that everyone believed. I had nowhere else to go." The pieces clicked together in Silas's mind. A woman's reputation destroyed, probably by some entitled man who couldn't handle rejection, the same old story that had ruined countless women back east. But out here, on the frontier, the past mattered less than what you did with your present. As he climbed up to take the reins, he made a decision that would change both their lives. "Miss Blackwood," he said, loud enough for the whole town to hear, "you're under my protection now. Anyone who's got a problem with you has got a problem with me." The warning in his voice was clear as a bell, and several of the onlookers suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. As the wagon rolled out of town, Eliza's tears finally stopped, replaced by something that might have been the first spark of hope. 3 years earlier, Silas Hawthorne had claimed this piece of land with blood, sweat, and the last of his father's inheritance. The Double Oak Ranch spread across 200 acres of Wyoming grassland, backed by mountains that turned purple at sunset, and protected by a creek that never ran dry. He'd built the main house himself, log by log, his hands growing calloused and strong with each passing season. The ranch wasn't much compared to the big cattle operations further south, but it was his, earned honesty after running from his own shameful past in Missouri. As the wagon crested the final hill, Eliza stirred in the back, pushing herself up to see her potential new home. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold, the modest 2-story cabin with its wraparound porch, the sturdy barn, the corral where a dozen horses grazed peacefully. Silas watched her face from the corner of his eye, saw her eyes widen, not with disappointment, but with something like wonder. "You built all this?" she asked, her voice still hoarse from crying. He nodded, suddenly aware of how rough everything must look to a woman from Philadelphia's polished streets. "It's beautiful," she said simply, and meant it. Something in her voice told him she saw what others might miss. Not just the physical structures, but the promise they represented, the chance to build something lasting in a world that seemed determined to tear everything down. As he helped her from the wagon, she swayed slightly, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Miss Blackwood, before we go inside, I need you to know something." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded document, one he'd had drawn up the day after her first letter arrived. "This is a deed modification. If you marry me, you become half owner of everything here, the land, the cattle, the horses, all of it. Not in some future promise, but legal and binding from day one." Her breath caught, and fresh tears sprang to her eyes, but these were different from before. "Why would you? You don't even know me. And when you hear what happened?" He held up a hand to stop her. "I know enough," Silas said, leading her toward the house. "I know you write with intelligence and humor. I know you were brave enough to answer a stranger's advertisement and travel 2,000 miles. And I know that whatever that man back east said about you was lies born from wounded pride." She stopped walking, forcing him to turn and face her. "How can you be so sure?" The question hung between them like morning mist, delicate and important. Silas thought of his own past, of the fire that had killed his brother, of the whispers that followed him from Missouri. Murderer, they'd said, even though it had been an accident, even though he'd tried to save Samuel until his own hands were burned raw. "Because I've seen what happens when powerful men don't get what they want. They destroy what they can't possess. And because—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I came to Wyoming carrying my own burden of accusations that weren't true. Out here, we judge people by what they do, not what others say about them." The front door of the house opened before they reached it, and out stepped Rosa Mendez, Silas's housekeeper, and the closest thing to family he had in Wyoming. The older Mexican woman took one look at Eliza's tear-stained face and dusty clothes, and immediately went into mothering mode. "Aye, poor little thing. Come inside. You need food and rest, not more talking." She shot Silas a look that clearly said men were useless in these situations, and ushered Eliza inside. The house's interior surprised Eliza again. It was simple but clean, with handmade furniture and windows positioned to catch the best light. Rosa led her upstairs to what would be her room, a space Silas had prepared carefully with a real bed, a dresser, and even curtains Rosa had sewn from fabric ordered from Denver. "You rest now," Rosa said firmly. "Tomorrow is soon enough for decisions. Tonight, you are a guest. Nothing more is required." As Eliza sank onto the bed, still wearing Silas's coat, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: safety. Downstairs, Silas paced the kitchen while Rosa prepared a tray of food. "She's running from something bad," Rosa observed, slicing bread with practiced efficiency. "But she's got steel in her spine, that one. I can see it." Silas nodded, remembering how Eliza had tried to stand tall, even while falling apart. "The question is whether she'll stay once she's rested. Once the fear wears off and she realizes what life here really means." Rosa snorted. "You mean once she realizes you're a decent man who'd treat her right? Oh, see, what a terrible fate." Her sarcasm made Silas smile despite his worry. From upstairs came the sound of footsteps, then Eliza's voice calling down, "Mr. Hawthorne, might I speak with you?" When she appeared on the stairs, she'd washed her face and repinned her hair, looking more like the photograph she'd sent with her letters. "I owe you the truth," she said. "All of it, and then you can decide if your offer still stands." They sat in the parlor as evening painted the mountains purple, and Eliza told her story: the headmaster's son, who'd cornered her in the empty schoolroom, her rejection of his advances, his vicious lies that painted her as a woman of loose morals who'd tried to seduce him. "No one believed me," she finished. 20 years of spotless reputation, gone in a day. Even my own sister suggested I must have encouraged him somehow." The silence stretched until Silas spoke. "The offer stands. In fact, knowing you stood up to him makes me respect you more." And in that moment, something shifted between them. The beginning of trust, where there had only been desperation. The next morning came crisp and bright, with frost edging the grass and the mountains standing sharp against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Eliza woke confused, then remembered. Wyoming, Silas, a chance at redemption. She dressed carefully in her simplest dress and found her way downstairs where voices carried from the kitchen. "Need to be gentle with the bay mare she's carrying," Silas was saying to someone. "Yes, boss," came a younger male voice. "I'll take extra care." When Eliza appeared in the doorway, both men stood quickly, removing their hats, The younger one was barely 20, with sandy hair and kind eyes. "Miss Blackwood, this is Tom Garrett, my foreman," Silas said. "Tom, Miss Blackwood has come from Philadelphia." Tom's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Welcome, ma'am. It's good to have a lady at the Double Oak again." The word "again" caught Eliza's attention, but she filed it away for later. Rosa bustled in with coffee and biscuits, practically forcing Eliza into a chair. "You eat," she commanded. "Too skinny for Wyoming winter." After breakfast, Silas offered to show her around the ranch, and Eliza accepted, curious about this life she was considering. They walked through the morning sunshine, their breath making small clouds in the cold air. "That's the chicken coop," Silas pointed out. "Rosa manages them, but she's been saying she needs help. The garden plot is over there. Nothing growing now, but come spring it could be productive again." His voice carried pride, but also uncertainty, like he was offering gifts he wasn't sure she'd want. "My mother kept chickens," Eliza said suddenly. "Back before she died. I was 12, but I remember helping her." Something softened in Silas's face. "I'm sorry for your loss." They continued walking, reaching the corral where several horses stood, watching them with intelligent eyes. "Do you ride?" he asked. "I did, as a girl. My father thought it important that his daughters know how." She reached out tentatively to stroke a gentle-looking brown mare who'd approached the fence. "That's Buttercup," Silas said. "She's the sweetest-tempered of the lot. She could be yours if you stay." The "if you stay" hung between them, both possibility and question. Eliza turned to face him fully. "Mr. Hawthorne Silas, I need to ask you something directly. Why did you advertise for a mail-order bride? A man like you, with all this, you could have your pick of women." He was quiet for a long moment, watching the horses. "The last woman I courted was back in Missouri, when the fire happened, when my brother died, and people blamed me. She was the first to turn away. Said she couldn't marry a man with blood on his hands, even though the fire was an accident, even though I nearly died trying to save him." His voice stayed steady, but Eliza heard the old pain underneath. "After that, I figured if I was going to try again, it would be with someone who chose me, knowing I wasn't perfect. Someone who needed a fresh start as much as I did." The honesty of it, the vulnerability, made Eliza's chest tight. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" she said softly. "Two people running from lies that destroyed our lives." He smiled then, a real smile that changed his whole face. "Maybe that's why we might work. We both know what it's like to lose everything." They spent the rest of the morning together, Silas teaching her about ranch operations, while Eliza shared stories from her teaching days. She was surprised to find him well-read, with opinions on books she'd taught to her students. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married," he explained. "She made sure my brother and I could read and write proper." As the sun climbed higher, warming the air, Eliza felt some of her fear melting away. This wasn't what she'd expected. She'd prepared herself for a cold business arrangement, not this gentle courtship, not a man who looked at her like she was worth protecting. "There's something else," Silas said as they headed back toward the house. "Cedar Ridge is building a school. They've been looking for a teacher for months. If you wanted, after we're settled, the position could be yours." The idea of teaching again, of having purpose beyond just being a wife, made Eliza's eyes bright with hope. "They'd hire me, even if they heard." "They'll hear nothing but what we tell them," Silas said firmly. "And what they'll see is a qualified teacher who can give their children education." That afternoon, while Silas worked with Tom on ranch business, Rosa taught Eliza about the house's routines. "He's a good man, Senor Silas," Rosa said as they folded laundry together. "Quiet. Sometimes too serious, but good to his bones. He gave my husband work when others wouldn't hire a Mexican. When Miguel died last winter, Silas paid for the funeral and made sure I had a home." Eliza absorbed this information, building her picture of the man she was considering marrying. "Has he been alone long?" she asked carefully. Rosa's face went thoughtful. 3 years since he came here. There was a woman from town, the banker's daughter, who chased him for a while. But Silas said he wasn't interested in someone who only saw his land, not him. That evening, over a dinner of Rosa's excellent stew, Silas made his formal proposal. "I know it's only been a day, but I also know my own mind. If you're willing, we could be married on Sunday. Give you a few days to be certain, to see more of what life here means." Eliza's heart raced, but not with fear this time. "And if I say yes? Then we start building something together, not just a ranch, but a life, equal partners, like I promised." She looked at his earnest face, at Rosa nodding encouragingly, at the solid walls of this house that could become home. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. "Yes, I'll marry you Sunday." Sunday dawned with a surprising warmth for late October, as if the weather itself blessed their union. Eliza stood in her room, wearing her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out her eyes while Rosa pinned small wildflowers in her hair. "You are nervous?" Rosa asked, her knowing eyes catching Eliza's trembling hands. "Terrified," Eliza admitted. "Not of Silas, but of failing. What if I'm not strong enough for this life? What if the town rejects me?" Rosa turned her firmly toward the mirror. "You see this woman. She crossed a continent alone. She survived lies and shame. She is stronger than she knows." A knock at the door interrupted them, and Tom's voice called out, "Miss Blackwood? Mr. Hawthorne sent me to fetch you when you're ready. The whole town's gathered at the church." The whole town. Eliza's stomach flipped. She'd hoped for a quiet ceremony, just the necessary witnesses. Rosa seemed to read her panic. "They come because Silas is respected. If he chooses you, they will accept you. You'll see." The ride to town felt both endless and too quick. Silas had sent the good wagon, decorated with ribbons that fluttered in the breeze. The small church sat at the end of the main street, its white paint bright in the morning sun. True to Tom's word, it seemed everyone in Cedar Ridge had come. Eliza saw curious faces, some friendly, others skeptical. Then the church door opened and Silas stepped out, and everything else faded away. He'd dressed in his finest, a black suit that fit him perfectly, his usually unruly dark hair combed neat. But it was his expression that stopped her breath, wonder, relief, and something that might have been the beginning of love. He walked to the wagon and helped her down, his hand steady on her waist. "You came," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might wake up and realize you could do better than a haunted rancher with calloused hands and a reputation for being unsociable." She squeezed his arm. "And I thought you might realize you could do better than a ruined schoolteacher who showed up crying." He smiled then. "Look at us, fishing for reassurance like teenagers. Come on, let's get married before we talk ourselves out of it." The ceremony itself was simple. Reverend Morrison, a thin man with kind eyes, spoke about new beginnings and the courage of commitment. When he asked if anyone objected, the church stayed silent, though Eliza noticed the banker's daughter in the back row looking sour. Silas's vows were straightforward but heartfelt. "I promise to protect you, provide for you, and respect you as my equal partner in all things." Eliza's voice shook only slightly as she replied, "I promise to stand beside you, work alongside you, and build a life with you based on truth and trust." When Reverend Morrison pronounced them married, Silas kissed her gently, mindful of their audience, but his hand on her back trembled slightly, betraying his own emotion. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Garrett from the general store started clapping. Then others joined in until the whole church rang with applause. "Welcome to Cedar Ridge, Mrs. Hawthorne," someone called out, and Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. Happy ones this time. The reception was held at the town hall, a potluck affair where everyone brought something. Eliza was overwhelmed by the warmth of it. Women introducing themselves, sharing recipes and gossip, treating her like she'd always belonged. "Silas is lucky to have you," said Mrs. Patterson, the mayor's wife. "That man's been alone too long. Did you know he once worked 3 days straight to help rebuild the Olsons' barn after it burned? Never asked for a penny in return." These glimpses of her new husband's character from others' perspectives made Eliza's heart warm. She watched him across the room, awkwardly accepting congratulations from the men, looking uncomfortable with the attention but bearing it for her sake. Sheriff McKenna approached her during a quiet moment. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I want you to know something. Whatever brought you to Cedar Ridge, whatever you might have left behind, it doesn't matter here. Silas Hawthorne is one of the best men I know. If he vouches for you, that's good enough for the whole town." The relief that flooded through her was almost overwhelming. A fresh start, a real one, not just in name, but in fact. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Silas appeared at her elbow. Ready to go home. Home. The words settled in her chest like a promise. They said their goodbyes, accepted final congratulations, and climbed into the wagon. As Cedar Ridge fell behind them, Eliza felt the mantle of her old life finally slip away. She was no longer Eliza Blackwood, disgraced teacher with nowhere to go. She was Eliza Hawthorne, rancher's wife with a future to build. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for the church wedding, for making it public. You were claiming me in front of everyone, weren't you?" Silas kept his eyes on the road, but his hand found hers. "You're my wife. That means something out here. Anyone who disrespects you disrespects me, and everyone in that church knows I'm not a man to cross." It wasn't a declaration of love, not yet, but it was protection, partnership, and promise. As the Double Oak Ranch came into view, lit golden by the setting sun, Eliza squeezed his hand. They were strangers still in many ways, but they were married strangers, committed to making this work. And that, she thought, was enough to start with. December arrived with teeth, bringing the first real blizzard of the season just 6 weeks after their wedding. Eliza woke to howling wind, and Silas already gone from their bed. They'd been sharing a room for 2 weeks now, a development that had come naturally after an evening when she'd fallen asleep against his shoulder while he read aloud. She found him in the barn with Tom, both men covered in snow, despite being indoors. "3 cattle missing," Silas said tersely when he saw her. "Broke through the fence in the north pasture. If we don't find them before this storm gets worse, they'll freeze." She saw the calculation in his eyes. 3 cattle meant significant loss, money they needed for spring supplies. "I'll help," she said. "Tell me what to do." Tom started to protest, but Silas studied her face. "Can you keep the fire going in here? The horses need warmth, and if we come back near frozen, we'll need it too." She nodded, understanding he was giving her important work while keeping her safe. As the men prepared to leave, she grabbed Silas's arm. "Come back," she said simply. "Both of you." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe, that she cared. "Always do," he replied, then disappeared into the white wall of snow. The hours that followed were some of the longest of Eliza's life. She kept the barn fire burning, checked on the horses, and tried not to think about all the ways men could die in a blizzard. Rosa joined her, bringing coffee and worry in equal measure. "I've seen Silas work through worse," the older woman said, but her knuckles were white as she gripped her coffee cup. "He's too stubborn to die in a storm." They waited together, two women bound by concern for the men who'd ventured into danger. Eliza found herself praying for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. Not to the distant God of her childhood church, but to something wilder, more immediate. "Please bring him back. I've only just found him." The thought surprised her with its intensity. When had Silas become him in that particular way that made her chest tight? Somewhere between his patient teaching about ranch life and the way he held her when nightmares about Philadelphia woke her? It was nearly dark when she heard it, voices through the wind. She ran to the barn door, Rosa right behind her, and saw two figures leading 3 cattle through the driving snow. They were moving slowly, Tom clearly supporting Silas, who was limping badly. Eliza didn't think, just ran into the storm, reaching them as Silas's knees buckled. "Just twisted it," he said through chattering teeth. Tom did the real work, but Tom shook his head. He climbed down into Muller's Canyon to get the last one. Rope gave way on the climb back up. He's lucky it's just his ankle. Together they got both men and cattle into the barn. Eliza's hands flew over Silas, checking for frostbite, injuries beyond the ankle. His skin was ice cold, his lips nearly blue. "Rosa, we need hot water, all the blankets you can find," she ordered, surprised by the authority in her own voice. "Tom, help me get his boots off." They worked with efficiency born of necessity, stripping wet clothes, wrapping the men in blankets, forcing hot coffee between their chattering teeth. As warmth slowly returned to the barn, Silas caught Eliza's hand. "You did good," he said quietly, "keeping everything running, taking charge when we came back." She squeezed his fingers, finding them still too cold. "You risked your life for 3 cattle. Not just cattle," he corrected. "Our future. Every animal matters when you're building something from nothing." She understood then something fundamental about frontier life, the thin margin between success and failure, the constant dance with danger. "Next time," she said firmly, "we lose the cattle, I won't lose you." The words hung between them, heavier than she'd intended. Tom and Rosa found urgent business elsewhere, leaving them alone in the lantern-lit barn. "Eliza," Silas said slowly, testing her name like he was tasting it for the first time. "When I was down in that canyon, when the rope broke, and I thought I might not make it back up, you know what I thought about?" She shook her head, unable to speak. "I thought about you waiting for me, about how I'd promised to protect you, and here I was maybe dying for 3 head of cattle, and I realized something." He pulled her closer with their joined hands. "I don't want to die without telling you that this thing between us, it's become more than an arrangement for me." Before she could respond, the barn door banged open. Sheriff McKenna stood there, covered in snow. "Silas, thank God you're here. We've got trouble. The Garrison boys are riding through town, drunk and looking for a fight. They're saying things about your wife, ugly things they claim to have heard from back east." Silas tried to stand, but his ankle wouldn't hold him. The sheriff continued. "I've got them cooling off in jail for now, but come morning, this needs settling." Eliza felt ice in her veins that had nothing to do with the storm. The past had found her. even here. "It's my fault," she whispered. "I've brought trouble to your door." But Silas's hand tightened on hers, and his voice was steel when he spoke. "Sheriff, tell the garrison boys that if they want to spread rumors about my wife, they'll answer to me, twisted ankle or not." McKenna nodded. "That's what I told them. But Eliza should know. The whole town's talking. By morning, everyone will have heard their version." The warmth Eliza had felt moments before evaporated. Just when she'd thought she was safe, that she could build something here, the past reached out with poisoned fingers to destroy it all again. But then, Rosa spoke from the doorway. "Let them talk. We know who you are, mija. The town knows who Silas is. Truth is stronger than lies." And standing there in that barn, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with her, Eliza began to believe it might be true. Dawn came pale and bitter cold, the storm having blown itself out in the night. Eliza stood at the window watching Main Street fill with people, all heading toward the town hall. Word had spread. The garrison boys were demanding a public hearing, claiming they had information about the new Mrs. Hawthorne that the town deserved to know. Silas sat at the kitchen table, his ankle wrapped tight, jaw set in a line that meant trouble. "You don't have to go," he said for the third time. "I can handle this alone." But Eliza was already pinning up her hair, choosing her best dress, the blue one from their wedding. "They're calling me a liar and worse. If I hide, I prove them right." Rosa bustled between them, muttering Spanish words that didn't sound like prayers. "The whole town will be there," she warned. "Everyone loves a scandal." Tom appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "Wagon's ready, boss, and just so you know, me and some of the other hands, we'll be there too. Anyone wants to say something about Mrs. Hawthorne better be prepared to say it to all of us." The town hall was packed, just as Rosa had predicted. The Garrison brothers, Luke and Samuel, known troublemakers who'd been run off 2 ranches for stealing, stood at the front, smirking. Sheriff McKenna looked tired, Mayor Patterson uncomfortable. But what struck Eliza most were the faces of the townspeople. Some looked curious, others sympathetic, but many seemed angry. Not at her, she realized, but at the disturbance. Mrs. Garrett caught her eye and nodded firmly. The banker's daughter, Catherine Wells, sat in the front row looking pleased. "Now then," Mayor Patterson began, "the Garrison boys claim they received a letter from Philadelphia about Mrs. Hawthorne. Luke, present your evidence." Luke Garrison pulled out a piece of paper with theatrical flair. "Says here that Eliza Blackwood was dismissed from the Whitmore Academy for inappropriate conduct with a male student. Says she seduced the headmaster's son, tried to trap him into marriage." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eliza felt Silas tense beside her, ready to rise despite his injury, but she put a hand on his arm and stood herself. "May I see this letter?" she asked, her teacher's voice carrying clear across the room. Luke hesitated, then handed it over with a sneer. Eliza examined it carefully, noting the handwriting, the seal. Then she laughed, actually laughed, which wasn't what anyone expected. "This is remarkable," she said. "Luke, where did you learn forgery?" "Because whoever taught you did a poor job." She held the letter up. "First, the Whitmore Academy seal is wrong. The eagle faces left, not right. Second, Headmaster Whitmore died 2 years ago. His son, Gerald, has been running the school since then. He would hardly refer to his deceased father in the present tense." The crowd murmured. Sheriff McKenna stepped forward, took the letter, examined it. "She's right. This is fake." But Luke wasn't done. "Maybe that letter's wrong, but everyone knows there's no smoke without fire. Why else would a refined lady from Philadelphia come all the way out here to marry a stranger? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Eliza straightened her shoulders. You want the truth? Very well. I did leave Philadelphia because of Gerald Whitmore. He cornered me in an empty classroom, put his hands on me, and when I fought him off, he told everyone I had tried to seduce him. He destroyed my reputation because I wouldn't become his mistress. Her voice grew stronger with each word. I came here because I refused to live in shame for something I didn't do. Because I believed that in the West, people judge you by your actions, not by gossip. She turned to address the crowd directly. In the 2 months I've been here, what have you seen from me? Have I been anything other than a dutiful wife, a good neighbor, a woman trying to build an honest life? Mrs. Patterson stood up. She helped nurse my daughter through fever last week, never asked for anything in return. She's been teaching my boys their letters, added Mrs. Olson. First time they've shown interest in learning. More voices joined in, listing small kindnesses, quiet help, given without expectation of reward. Catherine Wells stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Even if the letter is fake, she admits she left in scandal. Silas, surely you see you've been deceived. But Silas was standing now, balanced on his good foot, and his voice was thunder when he spoke. The only deception here is from 2 thieves trying to blackmail my wife. Oh, yes, he continued as the Garrison boys started to protest. Didn't you boys approach Tom yesterday, suggesting this could all go away for the right price? Tom stepped forward. They did. Said they'd leave town quiet-like for $50. Sheriff McKenna's face darkened. Extortion is a serious crime, boys. The momentum had shifted completely. Luke Garrison tried one more time. You're all fools if you believe her over. But he never finished. Old Pete from the saloon, who never spoke in public, stood up. I knew a Gerald Whitmore once, 20 years ago in Boston. Nastiest piece of work I ever met. Liked hurting women who couldn't fight back. If his son's anything like him, I believe every word Mrs. Hawthorne says. The room exploded in discussion, but Mayor Patterson banged his gavel. Seems to me we've heard enough. Sheriff, I think you should escort the Garrison boys to consider their options. Leave town immediately or face charges. As the sheriff marched the brothers out, the townspeople surrounded Silas and Eliza. Apologies, support, and, remarkably, some shared stories of their own past scandals and fresh starts. We've all come here running from something, Mrs. Garrett said quietly. That's what the frontier is for, second chances. Catherine Wells pushed through the crowd, her face flushed. Silas, surely you see, but Silas cut her off. Catherine, my wife showed more courage standing up here today than you've shown in your entire comfortable life. We're done here. He took Eliza's arm, and they walked out together, the crowd parting respectfully. Outside in the cold morning air, Eliza finally let herself shake. You were magnificent, Silas said against her hair. I've never been prouder to call someone my wife. She pulled back to look at him. You believed me. Even before I proved the letter was fake, you believed me. Always, he said simply. From the moment you arrived in tears, I knew you were running from injustice, not from justice. And there in the street where she'd first arrived broken, she kissed him properly, not caring who saw. The town had tested them, and they'd stood together. Whatever came next, they'd face it the same way. March arrived with muddy boots and swollen creeks, bringing the controlled chaos of calving season to the Double Oak Ranch. Eliza had never seen Silas so focused, so tired, or so alive. He'd been up 3 nights straight with difficult births, and she'd been right beside him, learning to pull calves and warm the weak ones. Never thought I'd see a Philadelphia schoolteacher elbow deep in a cow, Tom had said admiringly after she'd helped save twin calves. Now she stood in the barn at midnight, holding a lantern while Silas worked to turn a breeched calf. His face was streaked with sweat despite the cold, his hands gentle but firm. "Almost there," he muttered. "Come on, little one." The cow bellowed, and then suddenly there was movement, a rush, and a wet calf sliding into the straw. But it wasn't breathing. Without thinking, Eliza dropped to her knees, clearing the calf's mouth and nose, rubbing its sides roughly like she'd seen Silas do. "Come on," she whispered fiercely. "Breathe." And then it did, a gasping, beautiful sound, and its mother immediately began cleaning it. Silas looked at her with something profound in his eyes. "You're a natural," he said softly, "a real rancher's wife." The pride in his voice made her chest tight with emotion. They walked back to the house together, exhausted but exhilarated. 23 healthy calves so far, only 2 losses. Better than most years, Silas had said. At the porch, he caught her hand. "Eliza, there's something I've been meaning to say." But before he could continue, Rosa burst out the door. "Senora, come quick! There's a letter from Philadelphia." Eliza's blood went cold. After the Garrison incident, she'd hoped never to hear from that city again. With trembling fingers, she opened the letter, aware of Silas reading over her shoulder. It was from her sister, Martha. "Eliza, I must beg your forgiveness. Gerald Whitmore has been arrested. 3 other teachers came forward after you left, admitting he'd done the same to them. The school board has issued a formal apology and invitation for you to return to your position with full restoration of reputation." The letter fluttered from Eliza's numb fingers. Vindication, after all these months. Her name cleared, her old life available again if she wanted it. She looked up to find Silas's face carefully blank, but she saw the fear in his eyes. Fear that she'd leave now that she had a choice. "Well," he said roughly, stepping back, That's good news. You're free to go back if you want. I won't hold you to marriage vows made under duress." The words seemed to cost him everything. Eliza stared at him in disbelief. "Silas Hawthorne, you fool of a man!" He blinked at her tone. "Do you think I've been pretending these past months? That I helped birth calves and survived blizzards and stood up to the Garrison boys because I had no choice?" She stepped closer, poking him in the chest. "I had a choice the moment you said, 'You don't have to pretend with me.' Every day since then, I've chosen to stay. Not because I had nowhere else to go, but because I found where I belong." Her voice broke slightly. "I love this ranch. I love Rosa and Tom, and our stubborn horses, and even the ornery chickens. I love the way the mountains look at sunset, and how the creek sounds in the morning. And most of all, you impossible man, I love you." The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Then Silas was kissing her, really kissing her, not the gentle pecks they'd shared before, but something desperate and joyful. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said roughly. "Have for months, probably since you stood in that barn covered in hay and told me you wouldn't lose me over 3 cattle." Rosa cleared her throat loudly from the doorway. "If you two are done with declarations, there's another cow laboring." But she was smiling, and Eliza saw her quickly wipe her eyes. They spent the rest of the night working side by side, and when dawn broke over the ranch, painting everything gold and green with spring's promise, Eliza penned her response to Martha. "Thank you for writing, but I must decline the generous offer. I have found my place here in Wyoming as wife, rancher, and soon as the new schoolteacher for Cedar Ridge. My reputation matters less than my reality. I am loved, respected, and at home." A month later, on a perfect April morning, Eliza stood before 15 eager faces in Cedar Ridge's new schoolhouse. The town had built it over the winter, and she'd been unanimously chosen as teacher. "Good morning, class," she said, and felt the rightness of it down to her bones. Through the window, she could see Silas talking to the sheriff, probably about the cattle drive planned for next month. He caught her looking and tipped his hat, that private smile just for her. That evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple, Eliza felt a flutter in her belly that had nothing to do with nerves. She'd suspected for a week now, had confirmed it with Rosa's knowing looks and careful questions. "Silas," she said quietly, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to need to add another room to the house." He went absolutely still, his eyes wide with wonder and a touch of fear. "You mean, come November, there'll be 3 of us." He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of spun glass and steel at the same time. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." And as the first stars appeared over the Double Oak Ranch, Eliza knew that every tear she'd shed on that stagecoach had been worth it to reach this moment. This life, this love, this future they were building together on the frontier. November 1874 arrived with the first heavy snow and Eliza's first labor pains. She'd been teaching right up until the week before, her students delighted by their teacher's growing belly and full of suggestions for names. Now she gripped Silas's hand as another contraction rolled through her, Rosa coaching her in a mix of English and Spanish, while the midwife from town worked with calm efficiency. "You're doing fine, mija," Rosa soothed, but Eliza saw the worry in Silas's eyes. He'd delivered countless calves, but this was different. This was his wife, his child. "Remember when you told me I didn't have to pretend?" Eliza gasped between pains. "Well, I'm not pretending this doesn't hurt like hell." Despite everything, Silas laughed, pressing his lips to her sweaty forehead. "That's my girl, strong as Wyoming granite." Hours passed, the snow falling steadily outside, creating a cocoon of white around the house. Tom kept the fires burning, the ranch hands took turns shoveling paths, and the whole Double Oak seemed to hold its breath waiting. Then, just as the sun broke through the clouds, setting the snow-covered mountains ablaze with light, James Samuel Hawthorne entered the world with a cry that could have woken the whole territory. "A son," the midwife announced, placing the squalling bundle on Eliza's chest. "Healthy and loud, just like his father." Silas stared at the tiny face, one finger trembling as he touched the baby's impossibly small hand. When those tiny fingers wrapped around his, the strongest man Eliza knew started crying. "He's perfect," he whispered, "just like his mother." Rosa bustled everyone out to give the new family privacy, but not before pressing kisses to all 3 foreheads and declaring James the most beautiful baby in Wyoming. As the room quieted, Eliza watched her husband hold their son for the first time, his massive hands impossibly gentle. "James for my father," she said softly, "and Samuel for your brother. They're both part of his story." Silas's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He'll know about them, about all of it, where we came from, what we overcame." Word spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire, and by afternoon, despite the snow, gifts began arriving. Mrs. Garrett sent a hand-sewn quilt. The Patterson family brought enough food for a week, And even Catherine Wells, now married to a banker from Denver, sent a silver rattle with a note of genuine congratulations. Sheriff McKenna stopped by with news that made them both laugh. The Garrison boys had been caught rustling cattle in Montana and would be guests of the territorial prison for the next 5 years. "Seems like all debts are settling today," he said, admiring young James. That evening, as snow continued to fall softly outside, Silas and Eliza sat together in their bed, James sleeping between them. The house was warm and solid around them, filled with the smells of Rosa's cooking and the sound of wind through the rafters. "A year ago," Eliza marveled, "I was on a stagecoach, crying my eyes out, certain my life was over." "And I was waiting at that stage stop," Silas added, "expecting a business arrangement, maybe some companionship, never dreaming I'd get all this." They were quiet for a moment, listening to James's tiny breaths, watching his chest rise and fall. Through the window, the Double Oak Ranch spread out under its blanket of snow, the barn sturdy and strong, the cattle settled for winter, the mountains standing eternal guard. Everything they'd built together in just 1 year, and now this miracle between them. "I've been thinking," Silas said slowly, "about what you said that night in the barn, about not pretending. We started this marriage with honesty, you showing up in tears, me promising you didn't have to pretend. Maybe that's why it worked. We never tried to be anything other than what we were, broken people trying to build something whole." Eliza traced their son's perfect features with one finger. "We're not broken anymore, though. We're complete." "No," Silas corrected gently. "We're still the same people, still carrying our scars, our past, but now we carry them together, and now we have him to carry forward the best of us." A knock at the door interrupted them. Tom's voice calling that one of the mares was foaling. Silas looked torn, but Eliza smiled. "Go. This is our life. Babies being born, animals needing tending, work that never stops. James and I will be here when you get back." He kissed them both, lingering over his son's downy head, then headed out into the snow. Eliza watched from the window as lanterns bobbed toward the barn, heard the men's voices carrying on the cold air. This was their kingdom, not grand, not perfect, but theirs, built on honesty, strengthened by trials, blessed now with new life. Rosa appeared with warm milk and soup, clucking over them both. "You did good, Senora. Gave him a son on the first try. Strong boy, like his papa." She paused at the door. "You know what I think? I think God knew what he was doing, sending you here in tears. Sometimes we have to break all the way open before we can let the good things in." As the night deepened and James stirred for his first feeding, Eliza thought about that frightened woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach 14 months ago. She'd thought she was running away from her life, but really, she'd been running toward it. Toward Silas, toward the Double Oak, toward this moment, holding her son, while snow fell on the home they'd made. When Silas returned, covered in snow but grinning, announcing a healthy foal, he found his wife and son exactly as promised, waiting for him, complete and whole. "Come to bed," Eliza said softly. "Your son wants to meet his papa properly." And as Silas gathered them both in his arms, the little family complete, the wind outside sang through the Wyoming mountains, telling their story to the stars. Sometimes the best things begin with tears, with honesty, with two broken people brave enough to say, "You don't have to pretend with me." In that truth, they'd found everything: love, purpose, family, and home. The Double Oak Ranch stood strong against the winter night, sheltering the life they'd built, the love they'd earned, and the future they'd face together. No pretense needed, just truth as solid as the mountains themselves.